I've always said we need to look at our history. The comments I was referring to was to how the New South Wales settlement was first established. There was not the laws that have ever approved of slavery in this country. So I don't intend to get into history wars.
The Prime Minister Scott Morrison today, after this comment yesterday, which has been causing a whole lot of trouble.
Australia, when it was founded as a settlement, it was a pretty brutal place, but there was no slavery in Australia.
There was clear slavery in Australia.
I find it very disappointing that the Prime Minister selects particular aspects of our history.
But as the PM quickly learned, our history is a lot more complicated.
Claims that Australia hasn't had slavery really do fail to take into account the reality of Australia's past. As long as Europeans have been in Australia, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have been exploited and have had their labour appropriated.
In the 1860s, as many as 62,500 South Sea Islanders were brought to Australia, forced to work on sugarcane fields in Queensland, a practice known as blackbirding. There's even newspaper articles on the slave trade up north.
People who were in the Pacific, in places like Vanuatu, were often forcibly taken onto ships and brought to places like Queensland and northern New South Wales. A lot of people from the South Sea Islander communities do look upon the experiences of their ancestors as a form of slavery.
But even beyond the South Sea Islanders that were forced to come here, there was plenty of slavery of our First Nations people, from working on cotton plantations, cattle and sheep properties, to household servants. In 1891, this slave map of modern Australia was published.
This is not hidden history. This is very well known and very well documented, and throughout the colonial period, people openly discussed the ethics of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander slavery.
As Black Lives Matter protests rage around the world, it might finally be time to take a hard look at a history none of us can be proud of.
Imelda Davis is the founding member of the Australian South Sea Islanders, and her grandfather was kidnapped from the island of Tanna when he was just 12 years old to work on our sugar plantations. Imelda, how did it feel for you today hearing the PM say that there's never been slavery in Australia?
Well, initially I received a phone call from a friend and I was actually really shocked because just last year we had our 25th anniversary and we received a beautiful acknowledgement letter from the PM. So it sort of threw me, and then I guess a bit of rage kicked in, if I can say that. But, it's most unfortunate that something like this should happen, especially from our leaders in government and of the highest order.
Imelda, can you tell us more about your family's lived experience?
Absolutely. I was born in Brisbane, but I'm from Tweed Heads, on the Northern Rivers, which is a significant Australian South Sea Islander and First Nations community. And that community was formed out of, I guess, moving away from Queensland control. And my grandfather was kidnapped at the age of 12 off the island of Tanauta in Vanuatu. He was brought here to work in far north Queensland in sugarcane fields, and he was forced to work there until the White Australia policy kicked in. And he walked to Sydney and was exploited here as a dish hand, and then he went back to the Northern Rivers and settled, where he had 11 children, including my mother.
Do you know what effect it had on his life?
Absolutely, and what effect it's had on, many Australian South Sea Islanders or descendants of Australia's blackbirding trade, in that we are still significantly marginalised. We did not gain any wealth from this trade. It's been an ongoing struggle for the last 170-odd years.
Imelda, most people will have never heard of blackbirding. I hadn't until today. Does it surprise you that it's not taught in all schools?
No, it doesn't, because we've lived this constant one-trick pony narrative that we've had to continually get in front of our new heads of state, ministers, etc., and re-educate people. So that's not your fault. It's the powers that be in positions of change that need to change the education system. So we all need to chip in, as the great multicultural society that we are, and take responsibility. This is a shared history. We need to be included as a part of the Australian narrative alongside our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families.
The Prime Minister somewhat backtracked from his remarks today. What would you say to him if you had the chance to address him directly?
Let's work on this. Let's close the gap on the lack of knowledge around blackbirding in Australia and the slave trade. This is an extension of the global slave trade, the Atlantic slave trade or the African slave trade. You know, let's talk about these hard issues. You know, it's not something that can't be resolved. You know, we all work together as civil society today in Australia. He prides himself on not having issues or not importing issues. But, you know, we all make mistakes as well. So let's sit down and talk about it. We've got many Australian South Sea Islander organisations thriving in their communities, suffering because of the lack of resources and sustainability, trying to look after our seasonal workers, which we're seeing as another form of indentured labour. The challenges that we're facing there and saw on the news just recently as last night with people being exploited through loopholes. We want to take care of our families. We want to reconnect with our families. We deserve this. This is our birthright. Listen to us and please meet with us, Prime Minister.
Thanks so much for your time, Imelda.
Thanks, sister.